Hello, class. Welcome back from the holiday break. I'm excited to be back with you guys. We're going to be touching on Chapter 8, which is improving interpersonal relationships. So there's going to be a lot of major themes in this. A couple things that we're going to be talking about is, of course, conflict, managing your emotions, dialectical tensions, things like that. So um, more than just what's in the textbook, I've really taken a lot of time in your discussion, especially your discussion, to bring the concepts in the textbooks to life and help contextualize them in a manner that you deal with every day, and with the hopes of improving these relationships. So whether it be your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or husband or wife, or family, all right, or friends, I hope that you take away some of these things and can incorporate some of the things that we're going to learn this chapter into improving your relationships. So let's get into it. So there's relational dialectics. I know it sounds like a pretty big word, but it's real simple. Relational dialectics are describe the ongoing tension between contradictory forces in a relationship. So if you look to the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see a seesaw, right? And so it's a balancing act, and that's the best representation of the concept that I could come up with. And there's certain areas of balance or strain in a relationship. Another kind of visualization you can have on what this relational dialectics is a tug of war. And in the tug of war, you're trying to find balance between the two forces pulling on the relationship. And so the textbook identifies three areas of strain. The first area of strain is integration and separation. So an example for that would be would be a teenager and their mother and dad. Maybe you can recall when you were a teenager, or maybe you have a teenager yourself. Not even necessarily a teenager; could be a younger adolescent. And as a parent, you have a need to make sure that you're doing everything together. You're watching over them. You're protecting them. And when they hit a certain age, they start to separate from you and start to want to experience things on their own and have independence in that relationship. And so, especially in the teenage years, there becomes a tension between father and daughter, or daughter and mother, or son and father, or son and mother. As a teenager, they start pulling away from their parents, or parents want them to be integrated in the family, and they're seeking separation, separate identity, to try to understand themselves as an individual, not necessarily as a person within the family. And so that tension is always represented in a relationship, especially when you're dealing with teenagers or adolescents that are trying to find their own individual selves. Then there's stability and change. Stability and change. Stability is in any relationship, especially romantic relationships. Think about this. It's stability. We like to know that the person that we're with, they're stable. They're stable emotionally. They're stable financially. They're stable physically. I don't think that big, drastic changes are the cornerstone of committed relationships. It's really difficult to have a relationship with a person who is living in Arizona one minute and then they move to Hawaii the next second, or does one job then quits it and does another job and then quits it. Stability is really important. It's a very integral part of having a stable relationship. You want to know the person's always going to be there. You want to know the person's committed to you. You want to know that when you come home, there's not going to be some new person in your living room. You want to make sure that the person's stable. But in the same respect, there's another force in a relationship, and that's change, right? So having commitment, having routine is a great thing. But sometimes that can also weigh on the relationship as well. And so spontaneity, adventure, variety is important in a relationship as well. So those are things that pull on the relationship, and you have to find a balance to those. Especially in an intimate situation, it's essential for marriage to actually have variety in how they express themselves sexually. And when you guys do your discussion on the second part of it, there's a TED Talk I'm going to actually have you watch by this lady named Esther, and she's really going to go in and describe that relational dialectic, and then you guys kind of reflect on it and write about it. And I think that's going to be a really good way for you to unpack this concept. Last is expression versus self-disclosure. I'm sorry, expression / self-disclosure versus privacy. So we talked about getting to know other people. We talked about uncertainty reduction. We talked about self-disclosure. And that's definitely something that is necessary to increase intimacy in a relationship. You can't have intimacy without self-disclosure. Okay? And so that's important, but also what's important in a relationship is a level of privacy. I don't know about you guys out there. Some of you guys might be really private, and even in relationships, some of you guys might be really open. Everybody enters a relationship with different expectations of what they're going to keep private versus what they're going to be open about. And those ideas or understanding of what's appropriate in a relationship have to be reconciled, and you have to find a balance in those things. You might be with somebody who is very private about things and you're more open. How do you find a balance in that? I ask my in-person students, and I'll ask you guys too out there, how do you feel about cell phones in your relationships? Do you feel like your partner has access to check your cell phone? Do you feel like you have access to check theirs? Do you check your partner's cell phone? Are they allowed to check your cell phone? Or do you believe those things should be private? So these are things that are, have to be solved and figured out in a relationship. And if you're in a relationship long enough, that might actually come up to play. It's like, hey, I feel comfortable with you checking my cell phone. Why can't I check yours? Or, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong, but I do need privacy myself. So these are things that have to be figured out in a relationship. There's Myers-Briggs type indicator listed in the book, and it just basically talks about how you are as an individual. And to the extent we have our personality traits, informs how we communicate and interact with other people. And so they list different areas of personality types, like an extrovert, introvert, a sensor. I don't know how many of you guys are sensor people, detail orientated, precise, versus intuitive, which is you see the big picture. You're innovative, you get bored with details. Maybe you're a thinker. You're task orientated, you're objective. So typically thinkers don't care if other people get their feelings hurt as long as they get the job done. Maybe you're that type of person. Or maybe on the other hand, you're a feeler, in which you're people orientated and it's objective. And if the job gets done, no big deal, just as long as everybody emotionally feels good about their situation. You're drawn to making people feel good. Those are feelers. Judges are structural and punctual people, those type of people that believe that there's a time and a place for everybody. And then there's perceivers, people who are flexible and a little bit spontaneous on things. So, to the extent that you are or have a certain personality type, is going to have a huge impact on how you actually engage in conflict. So the book lists two different types of conflict. They list destructive conflict and constructive conflict. And you can see on the left all the different types of styles that are consolidated within destructive conflict. And it attacks others, it's insulting, it's defensive, it's inflexible. One thing that I notice here is it's competitive. And what I want to kind of position to you and ask you is, what happens when people compete? When I was a little kid, I used to be a big Phoenix Suns fan, and they did pretty good back when I was a kid, but they'd always lose the big games, And I was a little kid, and I was always hurt when they would lose, and I would storm off to my bedroom and cry. And my mom would come and try to console me, and she would say, "Chris, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose." I don't know if that really helped me that much, but it helped me understand competitive conflict. Because when you think about competitive conflict, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And when you are a competitive person in conflict, then you want to make sure the other person loses. And that's a very destructive way of doing conflict. And also avoids and aggregates conflict. Then next is constructive conflict. When constructive conflict, and conflict doesn't have to be bad. What conflict can do is it can focus on the issues and respect other people, can be supportive and flexible, and it actually can cooperate instead of being competitive. And lastly, constructive conflict is committed to actually managing conflict and mending differences. So next we're going to talk about conflict styles. So these conflict styles are pretty self-explanatory. Of course we have avoidance. And it's really important when you're looking at conflict styles to not be avoidant in conflict, because what happens is when you avoid conflict, the issue doesn't go away. It actually typically gets worse. Or either it boils up and festers up inside of you until you explode, and then it makes the conflict that much worse. Then there's accommodating, which is giving in to others at the expense of your own needs. There's also competitive, which is more concerned about filling your own needs than than the needs of other people, and it produces winners and losers like we talked about earlier. And then there's compromise, which is finding the middle ground. And then last, if you're lucky enough in conflicts, is to find collaboration where everybody wins. So in the textbook, it lists the AEIOU model of conflict resolution. And it's real simple. Assume the other person means well. That's what the A is for. I like to say assume positive intent. A lot of times when we're in conflict with people, we sit there and we get mad at them and we think that they're doing something offensive to us or something we disagree with simply because they're an evil person inside their heart and they're out to destroy us. That's not always necessarily the case. I would say the majority of the time it's not the case. And when we go into conflict with that mentality that they're evil down to their core and that they're out to get us, a lot of times conflict never gets resolved because we go into conflict with our fist up and ready to fight. And I think one way that we can do this better and enter conflict more productively is actually assume that the other person doesn't mean wrong. They actually mean well, but you got to clarify and work out some things. Second thing is E, for express your feelings. Next is I, identify what you would like to happen. There's nothing worse in conflict than somebody yelling at you but never identifying how you can improve upon it or make it better or what the issue is really in the first place. Don't be guilty of doing that. Identify what the issue is. If there's a problem, if there's an issue, identify it. And then O is outcomes you expect should be made clear. So let's say you have a roommate and they're not washing the dishes. You should identify that the reason why you're talking to them is because you need them to wash up behind themselves. And then tell them what you want them to do. Hey, I expect for when you use dishes to wash them and put them away. That's my expectations of you, so there's no misunderstanding. And then lastly is the U, an understanding on a mutual basis should be achieved. And that's the AEIOU model of conflict resolution. So we're going to talk about managing anger. So anger is an emotional response to unmet expectation. I think we've all experienced anger at some point. So there's some myths about anger we want to clarify. There's 3 of them. Number 1, anger and aggression are human instincts. They're not. 2, anger is always helpful. That's false. Anger is caused by others. That's also false. And I have a point in there. Remember to manage your emotion by recognizing the origin of anger is you. Here's what I mean by that. A lot of times you'll be in a relationship with somebody, or maybe it's your parents, maybe it's your brother or sister, and they do something that annoys you. And so you sit there and say, you make me so angry. But think about it. Really think about it. Did they make you angry? Do they have control of your feelings? If they do, then you're basically powerless. And you are subjected to however they act. But what I'm encouraging you guys to do is to not live life like that, to live life above that and actually have control of your feelings, have control of your anger. Other people don't make you mad. Being angry is a choice. So, yes, they might do something that is wrong, something that offends you, but it is your choice of whether you're going to get angry and lose your cool or whether you're not going to get angry. So, once you understand that you have the power to choose your emotional response to how people act, you're going to be able to control the outcomes out of any situation and be able to manage conflict that much more effectively. Developing assertiveness. So assertiveness is the ability to stand up for your own needs while respecting the needs of others. And then there's passivity, which is giving in to others at the expense of your own needs in order to avoid conflict. The last thing they're going to talk about is passive aggressiveness, and that's basically when you appear to cooperate, but you actually manipulate other people to get what you want behind their backs. So you want to have a healthy sense of assertiveness. All right, and so if you're too passive, then that sometimes leads to passive aggressiveness, which is a completely unhealthy way to interact with other people. So if there's something you need to ask. If there's something you need to deal with, it's important to step up and speak, right? And be transparent and open and honest about your needs rather than to be passive aggressive.